close your eyes for a second. Imagine you're standing at the mouth of a cave. It's 40,000 years ago. The sun is going down. The air smells like pine resin and dried animal blood. Behind you, your group is settling in for the night, children falling asleep against each other, the low murmur of voices fading into the dark. And then, someone picks up a burning branch and walks deeper into the cave, not to sleep, not to find food, not for any reason that has anything to do with survival. They walk to a wall, and they start to paint. Now ask yourself a question. What did that person believe? When they pressed their hand against cold stone and blew red ochre around their fingers to leave a perfect handprint on the wall, what were they thinking? Were they praying? Were they communicating with something beyond themselves? Were they performing a ritual? Or were they just bored? That question sounds simple. It isn't. Because how you answer it changes everything, not just about ancient humans, but about what religion actually is, where it came from, and whether the gods people worship today are something humanity invented or something humanity discovered. Let's go find out. What we know for certain here's what archaeologists agree on. The moment you can point to where human behavior clearly separated from every other animal on Earth was not the invention of tools. Chimps use tools. Crows use tools. It wasn't even the control of fire. That goes back over 1 million years. The moment everything changed was when humans started doing things with no immediate survival value. They buried their dead with flowers and red ochre. They painted animals on cave walls with such precision that modern artists have called it breathtaking. They carved figurines of women with exaggerated features and wore jewelry made from shells collected 20 kilometers away. None of this feeds you. None of it builds shelter. None of it keeps predators away. And yet, starting around 100,000 years ago, it appears everywhere. Africa, Europe, Asia, different continents, different climates, completely isolated populations of humans all doing the same inexplicable things. That's not coincidence. That's something wired into us. But here's the real question. Were any of these behaviors religious? Were ancient humans praying? Did they have gods? And if they did, what did those gods look like? The answer, it turns out, is both simpler and stranger than you expect. The burial problem, let's start with the dead, because that's where the evidence is oldest and most disturbing. In 1908, miners in southwestern France stumbled into a cave near a village called La Chapelle-aux-Saints. Inside, they found a skeleton, a Neanderthal. An old man, probably in his 40s, with severe arthritis, missing most of his teeth, and a jaw so deteriorated he couldn't have chewed hard food alone. He would have needed help to survive. Someone fed him. Someone kept him alive when he was no longer useful. And when he died, someone buried him. Deliberately, in a shallow pit, with animal bones placed nearby. Now, some researchers have argued about whether that burial was intentional or coincidental. Fair point. Let's look at more examples, because the evidence doesn't stop there. In Skul Cave in modern-day Israel, archaeologists found bodies buried with boar jaws tucked under their arms. These burials are 100,000 years old. In a cave in Iraq called Shanidar, a Neanderthal was found surrounded by traces of pollen 8 different species of flowering plants, some of which are still used medicinally today. The debate over whether that's a genuine flower burial or accumulated by animals has gone on for decades. But the sheer number of Neanderthal burials with deliberate artifacts tells a pattern. Here's what matters. Burial is not a practical behavior. You don't bury the dead to protect yourself from predators that would actually make more sense. You don't bury the dead because it tastes good or provides shelter. There is exactly one reason a creature goes to the trouble of placing a body carefully in the earth with objects beside it. Because they believe something happens after death. You don't prepare someone for a journey they're not taking. The Figurines Nobody Can Explain in 1908, the same year, coincidentally as that Neanderthal burial, a small carved figurine was found in a cave in Germany. It was made from mammoth ivory. It depicted a woman with enormous, exaggerated breasts and hips and no face. No arms visible. Just pure, distilled femininity carved with extraordinary precision by someone working with stone tools. Archaeologists called it the Venus of Willendorf, though she wasn't found in Willendorf and has nothing to do with Venus. She's around 30,000 years old. Now, here's what makes her remarkable. She isn't alone. Across Europe, archaeologists have found over 200 similar figurines. The Venus of Dolnvestanus, the Venus of Lossel, the Venus of Lespugue. Some made of ivory, some of stone, some of fired clay, which makes the Dolnvestanus figurine the oldest known ceramic object in the world, at 29,000 years old. These figurines appear across thousands of kilometers and thousands of years of human prehistory. And they all share the same features: large hips, large breasts, faceless, nameless, deliberately abstract, in exactly the same way. Nobody knows for certain what they were for. But here's what we do know. This kind of object, small, portable, deliberately carved to represent an amplified female form, appears in almost every human culture that has ever been studied. Many of them are connected to fertility, to birth, to the creative forces of the earth. Many anthropologists believe these figurines represent the earliest evidence of a female deity, a goddess of fertility, a mother figure at the center of the universe, something that would later become, in different forms, Isis, Ishtar, Gaia, the Earth Mother. The divine feminine that runs like a river beneath almost every religious tradition in human history. And here she is. 30,000 years old, fitting in the palm of your hand. Inside the painted caves in 1994, a group of explorers lowered themselves through a narrow shaft in a cliff face in southern France and found themselves in a chamber nobody had entered for 36,000 years. The walls were covered in paintings. Horses with shaded manes, a pride of lions mid-hunt, woolly rhinoceroses charging, bears, mammoths, aurochs, ibex, all rendered with a skill that would embarrass most modern artists. One section showed an owl turning its head, another showed a lion and a lioness nuzzling. This was Chauvet Cave. And it raised a question that archaeologists are still arguing about. Why were these paintings here? Deep underground, in chambers that required torches and significant effort to reach. Not at the entrance, not somewhere you'd rest or sleep or eat, but in the deepest, most inaccessible parts of the cave. Some researchers, including the anthropologist David Lewis Williams, have argued that these caves were not homes. They were cathedrals. Lewis Williams studied both ancient cave art and modern indigenous traditions extensively and noticed a striking pattern. Across cultures as different as the San people of southern Africa and the Mazatec people of Mexico, shamans describe a specific journey entering an altered state, traveling through a membrane between the ordinary world and the spirit world, and encountering animals as spiritual guides or power sources on the other side. The caves, Lewis Williams argued, were that membrane. Going deep underground, into complete darkness, by firelight, this was a ritual journey to another realm. The animals painted on the walls weren't decorations. They were spirits, guardians, forces the shaman was communicating with on behalf of the community. Now, some archaeologists push back on this interpretation. They argue we're projecting, that we can't know what the painters believed. That's a fair objection, and here's why it doesn't entirely hold up. When you stand at the entrance of Chauvet Cave and know that someone 36,000 years ago took a burning torch, walked for hundreds of meters into absolute darkness, found a specific wall, and then spent hours painting animals with shading and perspective, you are not looking at idle decoration. You are looking at intention, purpose, meaning. The only question is what kind. The first temple for a long time, scholars assumed organized religion came after civilization. First, you build cities. Then you build temples. Then you invent gods to explain what you've built. That assumption collapsed in 1994, the same year Chauvet Cave was discovered, when a German archaeologist named Klaus Schmidt began excavating a hillside in southeastern Turkey. What he found there rewrote the textbooks. Göbekli Tepe. Dated to approximately 11,600 years ago, it is the oldest known monumental architecture on Earth. Massive T-shaped stone pillars, some weighing 10 tons, arranged in circles with carved animals covering their surfaces. Foxes, snakes, vultures, wild boars, and humanoid figures with arms reaching down their sides. Here's what makes Göbekli Tepe impossible to explain by the old model. It was built before agriculture, before pottery, before the wheel, before cities, by hunter-gatherers who had not yet settled anywhere permanently. These people living exactly like the ancient humans we talked about earlier, hunting animals and gathering plants and sleeping under the open sky, built something that required organized labor on a scale that shouldn't have been possible. Hundreds of people working together for a purpose that could only have been ritual, because there's nothing at Göbekli Tepe that could be called practical. No homes, no storage, no farming infrastructure, no evidence that anyone lived there. It was, by every measure, a place of worship. And here is the thought that keeps archaeologists up at night. Schmidt argued, and this is the controversial part, that it wasn't civilization that created religion. It was religion that created civilization. Göbekli Tepe drew people. People who came from different areas to participate in ritual, to gather, to share food and effort. And the act of gathering, the necessity of coordinating, the shared belief in something larger that may be what forced early humans to develop the social complexity that eventually became cities and agriculture and everything that followed. God, or at least the idea of something sacred, may have come first. What the oldest stories tell us around 5,000 years ago, a culture in Mesopotamia, modern-day Iraq, began writing things down. The Sumerians gave us the first written literature in human history. And what did they write about? Gods. Enlil, god of wind and storms. Enki, god of wisdom and water. Inanna, goddess of love and war. A whole cosmos of divine beings with personalities, desires, rivalries, and relationships with humanity. But here's what's striking. When you compare the Sumerian pantheon with the gods of ancient Egypt, with the Vedic gods of ancient India, with the Norse gods, with the Greek gods' cultures separated by thousands of kilometers and thousands of years, you find the same patterns repeating. A skyfather who rules. An earth mother who creates. A trickster figure who disrupts. A death deity who presides over what lies beyond. A great flood that nearly ends everything. A hero who descends into the underworld and returns. These aren't borrowed stories. They're parallel ones. The mythologist Joseph Campbell spent his life documenting this and called it the monomyth, the single story that appears in every human culture, because it reflects something fundamental about how human minds work. Carl Jung called these recurring figures archetypes, universal psychological structures that every human brain generates independently. Whether you think that's evidence of genuine divine reality, or evidence of how the human mind processes existence, or both, or neither, the pattern itself is undeniable. Humans, everywhere, independently, believed in something beyond the visible world, something powerful, something that demanded acknowledgement. That is not coincidence. That is not invention. That is something that appears to be built into us. A day in the life, so let's do what we did before. Let's reconstruct it. You're living 50,000 years ago. The hunt was successful 2 days ago, and today there's no pressing need to go back out. The fire is low. Children are playing near the edge of the trees. A woman is grinding ochre, the red mineral your group uses for everything from preserving hides to painting faces. But not today. Today, someone in the group died. And what happens next is not grief in the animal sense, not the way elephants circle a fallen member or chimpanzees stare at a still body. What happens is ritual. The body is prepared. Objects are selected to go with it. There's discussion who speaks, what is said, what it means. That night, around the fire, the elder tells a story. Not the practical daylight conversation about animal tracks and plant locations, a different kind of story. About where the dead person has gone. About what waits beyond the visible world. About the spirits of the animals you hunt, the way you have to ask permission before you take a life, and give thanks after, because everything alive is connected to everything else. And when the fire gets low and people start to sleep, one person stays awake. The shaman, the one who goes where others can't go, who takes the plant that blurs the boundary between this world and the other one, and travels, and comes back with what the spirits said. This is not superstition. This is not ignorance. This is the oldest human technology. The technology of meaning. The attempt to understand why we're here, what we owe each other, and what happens when we're gone. It predates agriculture by tens of thousands of years. It predates cities. It predates writing, wheels, money, governments. By the time humans did any of those things, they had already been asking the deepest questions for so long that the questions had become ritual, and the ritual had become culture, and the culture had become civilization. The question nobody can answer here's where we have to be honest. We don't know, with certainty, what ancient humans believed. We can't interview them. We can't read their scriptures because they didn't have writing. All we have are the things they left behind, and the things they left behind are extraordinary. Burials with grave goods. Figurines of goddesses. Caves used as temples. A monument built by hunter-gatherers 11,600 years ago that still baffles engineers today. What we can say with confidence is this. From the earliest evidence of behaviorally modern humans from at least 100,000 years ago, possibly much earlier, there is consistent, global, undeniable evidence that humans were doing things that serve no survival purpose except to answer questions that cannot be answered practically. Where did we come from? Why do we suffer? What happens when we die? Is there something listening? Every culture, every continent, every era of human prehistory. The same questions, different answers, but always the questions. And here is the thought that is hardest to sit with. We live in an age that is more scientifically literate than any that came before. We have telescopes that see to the edge of the observable universe. We have mapped the human genome. We have explained thunder and lightning and disease and the movement of planets. And still, today, more than 80% of the world's population belongs to a religious tradition of some kind. Still, today, people pray and perform rituals and gather in buildings built for no practical purpose to participate in something they believe is larger than themselves. Your ancient ancestor, painting animals on a cave wall by firelight 36,000 years ago, was doing the same thing. Not because they were primitive, not because they didn't know better, but because the question itself, the question of whether there is something beyond the visible world, is not a question that science answers. It's a question that the human mind generates automatically, the same way it generates language and music and love. What this means here is what we can say. Ancient humans did not believe in the God of Abraham. They did not worship Allah or practice Christianity or follow the Torah. Those traditions are thousands of years old, ancient by human standards, but young by the standards of our species. But did they believe in gods? Did they believe in spirits? In a world beyond this one? In forces larger than themselves that demanded acknowledgement and ritual? The evidence says yes. Overwhelmingly, yes. The archaeologist Ian Davidson once said that the moment humans started burying their dead, the afterlife was invented. Because you only prepare someone for somewhere they're going. And once you believe in somewhere beyond this life, once you believe that the world you can see is not the only world that exists, everything follows. spirits, ancestors, sacred places. Rituals, prayers, priests, temples, theology, all of it grows from that one seed. The seed that was already planted 100,000 years ago when a human being, for the first time, looked at the body of someone they loved and couldn't accept that they were simply gone. That refusal to accept the void, that insistence that there must be something more, might be the most human thing we have ever done. More human than farming, more human than cities, more human than science. We were spiritual before we were civilized. And maybe that's not a bug in human nature. Maybe that's the feature. The thing that made everything else possible. The thing that made us look at the darkness and decide together that it wasn't empty. That there was something in it worth talking to.